pod bay doors, please, Hal.
Every punk in this town is scared stiff. They say he can't be killed. They say he drinks blood.
Is there a 6-foot bat in Gotham City?
Vicky Vale.
Bruce Wayne.
And what do you do for a living?
He's a tired old man. Can't run this city without me. Your luck is about to change. Winged freak terrorizes. Wait till they get a load of me. He's out there right now. And I've got to go to work. My life is really complex. I have given a name to my pain. I'm Batman.
The pod bay doors are open. I am your host, Doug Heller of TalkMovieToMe.com, also the co-host of the Cave of Wonders podcast with Jerry Roberts, who is seated across the country from me. Give us your information, Jerry.
I am Jerry Dean Roberts from ArmchairCinema.com and also ArmchairOscars.com. And Doug, I have a question for you. Is there a 6-foot bat in Gotham City?
And if so, is he on the police payroll? And if so, what's he pulling down after taxes?
If you haven't, well, we're talking about Batman today, and honestly,
Yes.
Doug picked this one because it's one of his favorite movies, and I like it too. So we're going to be talking just a little bit about Batman. The original Batman. There are 100 Batman movies, honestly.
Well,
we're talking about the Tim Burton, Michael Keaton,
1989.
1989.
Not technically the original Batman.
Not technically.
There was a serial. There was a serial in 1943, another serial in 1949, and then the Adam West, Burt Ward movie in 1966 that was done between seasons 1 and 2 of the television show.
If there's, I was thinking about this the other day. Now, a little behind the scenes here. I work in a bookstore, okay, and we have a television set up. And one of the things that we do is we'll have a movie running. Well, the last week or so, they've been running Batman. So this movie has been firmly ingrained in my brain for like 2 weeks. So I'm itching for this. And one of the things that I was talking to a guy the other day about the actors who played Batman, and there aren't probably as many. I'm talking about live action. Probably aren't as many as that have played like Superman. Batman's a little more localized, yet his universe is all over the place.
Oh yeah.
Because there's the 60s Batman, the comic book Batman, both incarnations, before and after Frank Miller. There's all kinds of. There's this movie, the Michael Keaton. There's the Val Kilmer. There's the George Clooney. There's the
Christian Bale.
Then there's Ben Affleck. He has all kinds of universes depending on who's playing him. And all kinds of iterations and changes in the character. And it's rarely ever consistent. This is the streamline of Batman's story is always consistent, but the character changes depending on the actor who's playing him.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know a little bit more about Batman than I do, but I mean, would this be your assessment?
Yeah, I mean, I think that each actor that plays him definitely brings a unique take to the character.
Mm-hmm.
They always try to play him at least close to, at least similarly, with the exception of George Clooney
Or Adam West.
and Adam West. Adam West talked about the show in a podcast I heard a couple years ago about, it was like the 50th anniversary of the show.
Yeah.
So I think it was last year.
Last year.
And so that would be 2016 for anybody listening far off in the future. And he said that he was drawn to the piece because of how funny it was, or how funny he understood it to be. So
he called it the light night.
He played it right. They played it for comedy, so that it could teach a lesson to kids but make adults laugh.
Yeah, and it also fit in the world because at the time, this was in the mid '60s. It was like that was the time of the Beatles, Andy Warhol. You know, all of this, and television hadn't gotten dark yet. It was goofy, gimmicky sitcoms, so it fit for that
and it
time.
Yeah, it did. It really did, and it fit with the Batman of the time too,
right.
Because by the mid '60s, Batman had gotten off the rails goofy. I think in one issue of the comics in the '50s, Batman literally turned into a buzzsaw, and Superman had to figure out how to change him back and remind him that he was a person before he went berserk and cut everything up.
Yeah. Well, this movie comes from a reiteration of the character, a reinvention of the character. I believe it was 85, 86 with
86.
Frank Miller.
It was 86 when the Dark Knight Returns came out. 1986.
This is based a little bit on that, because that was trying to deal with a Batman or Bruce Wayne that was older, that was dealing with a world that was far more violent, and was trying to, and I'm going to quote Frank Miller, give Batman his balls back. Pull him out of that 60s pop culture, which had become such a joke.
Right, and it should be said that Dennis O'Neil, writer Dennis O'Neil, and artist Neil Adams did a lot to reconfigure the character in the 70s, before the Crisis on Infinite Earths in the mid 80s, and then Frank Miller in 86. Because the DC Universe was always, before the New 52 came out in 2011, and Rebirth just happened at the end of 2016, was defined by pre-crisis and post-crisis.
Yeah.
And they had made all the Golden Age stuff part of Earth 2, and kind of shunted that off as no longer part of Earth 1 canon. So that's why Jay Garrick was no longer considered the first Flash. It was always Barry Allen on Earth 1.
Yeah.
And the Crisis on Infinite Earths reconfigured a whole lot of the characters, Batman included, and made him darker to fit with where Frank Miller was going. So the post-crisis Batman fit up with Frank Miller's Batman, and this movie comes out 3 years after that, so it's stemming off of The Dark Knight Returns, the vibe at least, without going anywhere near the older character and the storyline. It really took that vibe of a darker Gotham and a darker Batman, and And I think that Michael Keaton does an excellent job.
I remember, I'm going to say, I'm a little bit older than you. I remember, and you remember this too, but I particularly remember when that announcement came down. Now, there was no internet at the time, but when people heard Michael Keaton, there was no real outrage. The general consensus was, really? Mr. Mom? Because it's
Mr. Mom, Beetlejuice.
It's hard to remember now. People forget that before Batman, he was a comedian. He made light comedies generally.
Very light.
He started his first hit was Night Shift. You remember when they were he and Henry Winkler were pimps running a operation out of the New York City morgue. Love Brookas.
Yeah, wasn't that Ron Howard's first film as a director? It wasn't
his first, but it was the one that put him on the map.
It was his second.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The first was Grand Theft Auto. And he was a light comedian. And he was a good comedian. And he made all these movies. He made Mr. Mom, and he made that. He made The Dream Team and all this. And Beetlejuice, also directed by Tim Burton. Beetlejuice.
Yep.
And
Tim Burton's second film.
Yeah. But so it was an odd choice. And I think really Tim Burton was just going with an actor he was comfortable with, rather than trying to find a hulking,
right. And at the time, the male physique wasn't what it has been idealized as now.
Yeah.
You didn't have people that looked like Chris Evans and Chris Hemsworth, and they musculature wasn't like that unless you were a bodybuilder.
The biggest actors at that time were like Michael Douglas.
Right.
Like somebody who was a little more normal, so to speak.
Right. And the other thing, I think Tim Burton was seen as an odd choice for Batman as well, given that he was an animator and then he made Pee-wee's Big Adventure and then Beetlejuice.
Right. He was a stylist.
Yeah, very much so. And so those two choices were peculiar, and the saving grace in the casting announcements was Jack Nicholson as the Joker.
Yeah.
Because everybody went, that'll
So they
work.
made one choice people didn't like, and then one that no one could deny.
Right,
Although
exactly.
at the time I made the point that I thought that Tim Curry would have been perfect.
And he might have been.
He might have been.
He might have been.
Wouldn't have had the same impact as Jack Nicholson, but.
Right. And
looking back on it, Tim Burton seemed perfect for this, based on what Frank Miller had done. He seemed perfect for this. Well,
and now that we've seen the rest of his oeuvre, yeah, he's perfect for it.
Yeah.
But at the time, he hadn't developed any of that yet. This was a year before Edward Scissorhands.
I don't know. If you look at Beetlejuice and you look at Pee-wee's Big Adventure, the style was there. I mean, he was very much a
especially
stylist.
Especially in Beetlejuice.
Yeah. But he was.
But they weren't serious films.
No.
They weren't. You wouldn't have known that he would be able to pull off something as dramatic and action after Pee-wee's Big Adventure and Beetlejuice.
Right.
They were visual and comedy, and especially Beetlejuice was all about the visuals. I still don't really like Beetlejuice that much.
I love
Beetlejuice. I saw it when I was that came out in 87?
88. Just a year before
88? I was 7 years old when I saw Beetlejuice. I didn't like Beetlejuice.
Well, here's the thing, though, going back to Michael Keaton, is that Michael Keaton had done nothing but comedies, except a movie he made a year before this, which was a movie called Clean and Sober.
I was going to say, was that Clean and Sober?
And he really, I think that, in essence, if you follow his career, really sets him up for this role. because that's a deep, dramatic role. He plays a stockbroker who's addicted to drugs. And then, he was trying, I guess, to turn his career in a different direction. Not be the clown all the time. It's like every actor does that. They're like, I want to be something else. I want to try something else. And he did a good job. And so, in that way, I think he was perfect for this. However, this movie isn't really about Batman. This movie is very, very little about Batman. He's kind of the lesser role. He's kind of the second biggest role in the movie. And that's because of Jack Nicholson.
I think it's partly because of Jack Nicholson, and it's partly because, and we were talking about this before, that Tim Burton doesn't identify with heroes.
No. He likes his oddballs.
He likes his oddballs, and he likes the more off-center, villainous kind of shady character. Which is borne out specifically in Beetlejuice and later on in something like Sweeney Todd or something to that effect. He didn't really pay attention to Batman because he never paid attention to his heroes. And then when he tries to identify with the hero, which he tried to do with Alice in Wonderland, kind of falls flat.
Because he's trying to turn the hero into an oddball.
Right. And
he even does that with Dark Shadows.
Well, yeah. I mean, Dark Shadows had its own problems outside of Tim Burton, that had its own problems, but and the funny thing is that, like, Batman is probably the oddest hero that he could have tackled.
Yeah,
I mean, he's definitely not a run-of-the-mill kind of superhero. I mean, he doesn't have any superpowers, but he's a man, a very intelligent man, who dresses up as a bat and beats up criminals. How odd is that? It's weird.
Yeah.
But he doesn't play that up. He doesn't amp it up. He only comments on it through Joker.
I don't know what went into his selecting or choosing to take the job. I don't know if it was the money or the prestige or what. He said he didn't read comic books.
Right, and that's very evident, honestly.
But here's the thing. What director would want to handle this property? Because it's easy to say, oh, well, yeah, I'd love to direct Batman. This is a massive undertaking.
Batman always is.
Because you've got a lot to work with.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got a lot riding on it. And if it fails, when a movie fails, it almost invariably always falls on the director.
Yeah.
Directors have fallen before. Michael Cimino, Barry Sonnenfeld with Wild Wild West. Movies, if they're such a colossal failure, it can ruin your career.
Yeah, it can.
You don't want to fail with Batman.
No.
You don't want to fail with Batman. Even Schumacher has never really come back from Batman and Robin.
No.
You don't want to fall off the wagon with this one.
Right. And because Batman is such a rich character and so beloved.
A beloved character.
Yeah, absolutely. The most popular DC hero by a long shot.
Possibly the most popular comic book character.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and so, like, even more recently, the Ben Affleck was going to be doing. He signed on to write, direct, and star in the DCEU Batman standalone, and he's working on the script, and he gets to a point where he's just like, I can't put the focus that I need to in being Batman and also being behind the camera. The script wasn't coming together, so he's like, I need to step back and just play the part and bring in another director because I can't. He didn't think he could do justice to the character by playing all those roles behind the scenes as well. And it's
a lot of work.
It is a lot of work. It's a difficult undertaking for a regular movie to be an actor, director, and writer.
I don't know how Clint Eastwood ever did it. I mean, he would, like Unforgiven. He's not only the director, but he's also the star and the producer.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean,
how in the world? I mean,
and then when you get into people like Woody Allen, who writes, directs, and stars in his movies, or Orson Welles, who wrote, directed, produced, and starred in his own movies. Charlie Chaplin wrote, produced, directed, starred, and did the music for his movies. Although Chaplin is a little bit suspect because he would have gag writers for himself, but say that he came up with everything. The screenplay for Monsieur Verdoux was actually written completely word for word by Orson Welles, but Chaplin took screen credit and gave him a story credit after mitigation with the Writers Guild, because he explained to Orson, like, you have to understand, I'm known as doing everything myself, so I can't give you screenplay credit, but I'll give you story credit.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, and they were good friends.
Well, there's regulations nowadays that would never allow that.
No, but they were close friends, and he's like, this script would be perfect for you, and Chaplin kind of screwed him out on that deal.
Well, I think Tim Burton, one of the virtues of this film is that Tim Burton is only allowed to go so far.
And then we see why in Batman Returns.
The evidence of that is the movie that came immediately after this, Batman Returns, which was fully his production. It was fully his baby. He was allowed to do whatever he wanted, and that was a huge mistake.
Right, because
the movie sucks.
It's horrible. It's just.
It's not a Batman movie. It's a Tim Burton movie. It's not a Batman movie at all.
It's so goofy and like it's
disgusting.
Dark. It's disgusting. It's dark camp, and just recently, I sat my now 13-year-old son down and said, "We're going to watch Batman." So I put on the '89, and he really liked it. But I have that DVD 4-pack of all four of the 80s, 90s Batman. So Batman comes out at the end, he really likes it, in goes Returns. And I'm like, ugh. So he watches Returns, and I said, what did you think of it? And he's on the autism spectrum, so most of the time he either loves or likes a movie if he gets to see it. He's only recently started to say, no, I don't like this movie. He gave it it was an okay movie. Like he was into it for a point. I think he just liked it because of Michelle Pfeiffer. And then we watched.
Wouldn't.
Well, the way he screwed up Catwoman, I can't talk about Batman Returns right now. It's too painful.
That's another show.
Yeah, and then we watched Batman Forever, and he's like, yeah, that was okay. It was better than the second one. And then we watched Batman and Robin, and he gave it a huge thumbs down. He's like, this was terrible.
Yeah.
Like, and that's kind of how it goes. Like, Forever was at least entertaining and had some really good action sequences.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
But the villains are terrible. Tommy Lee Jones is too far over the top. Jim Carrey isn't funny. I said to my son, I said, what did you think of Jim Carrey as the Riddler? And he goes, I don't like him. I said, do you think he's funny? He goes, no. I said, thank you.
It's a Jim Carrey vehicle. It's a Jim Carrey vehicle with Jim Carrey playing the Joker.
Yeah, it's just he's so bad, and his one-liners fall so flat. Mm-hmm. And Tommy Lee Jones.
Well, it's based on what he's given because that script sucks.
Well, yeah. Well, see, and I'm sure that this will come up again at some point, but in those later pictures, they were written by none other than Akiva Goldsman, whom I hate.
Yeah, this is a whole dude. This is a whole thing you should know. He hates Akiva Goldsman.
I hate Akiva Goldsman. Every time I see anything that he's attached to, I end up having this unexplained anger until I see his name, and then it's explained. Because I just feel just angry when I'm watching his stuff. There was a thing that he produced. He didn't even write it. It was called Childhood's End on Sci-Fi Channel. It was a 3-part miniseries, like 2.5 or 3 hours each thing. And I'm sitting there watching the first part with my wife, who had already watched it, and she was like, "Oh, you'll like it." And I'm sitting there just seething. She's like, "I've never seen you so actively angry at watching something." And she watched Dreamcatcher in the theater with me, and I wasn't, and I hated that. That was the worst movie of the aughts for me. Even then, I wasn't as angry as I was when I was watching Childhood's End. And then I saw Akiva Goldsman. I'm like, oh, well, that's why I was angry. I almost didn't watch the other 2 parts.
Well, he didn't write Batman, so that's a good thing.
He didn't write the first one. No, he didn't.
This one was written by Sam Hamm and Warren Scarn. And it seems to borrow pieces and parts. This one seems to borrow pieces and parts from other places. There's a long, rich history of Batman that you can draw from.
Oh, absolutely.
But I think primarily where this one comes in is it draws its inspiration mostly from the Red Hood storyline.
Mm-hmm.
With the Joker and all of that. And I think it's trying to pull in an origin story. It does pull in an origin story. Which
was written in... let's see, 87 or 88 in the Killing Joke. Alan Moore, the writer of Watchmen, which is quite possibly the greatest graphic novel ever written.
Yes. And made an equally good movie. I don't care what anybody says.
Look, I agree with you on that. I loved Watchmen, the movie.
Yeah. Well, this one, it's what's interesting about this Batman movie is, and this would never happen today, is this movie is basically self-contained.
Mm-hmm.
You don't open the doors to a sequel. You don't open the doors to a... you're not really opening the doors to a franchise, but you are dealing with Batman's essential beginnings.
Mm-hmm.
The training is not there or anything like that. Basically, the story is that he has become an urban legend.
Right. He's been around for, I think, a few months or maybe even a year, but nobody's
and he's
really...
scaring criminals to death.
Right.
He's scaring not the criminal, not the major crime syndicates, but he's scaring the petty thugs.
The street level.
The purse snatchers.
The street level.
The street level.
Yeah.
And he's scaring them, and there's an urban legend, and of course, there's this whole thing, Batman doesn't kill people.
Yeah.
The essential element, and it's present here, the essential element to Batman, for me, it resides at the end of Batman Begins, when he says, "I'm not going to kill you, but I don't have to save you."
Right.
That is the essential element to how Batman does his job.
Mm-hmm.
And it's present here because he holds the guy over the ledge and he says, "I'm not going to kill you, but I want you to send a message."
Mm-hmm.
Because essentially that's what this Batman is doing, is he's sending a message.
Mm-hmm.
He's giving this crime-ridden, ugly, dirty, filthy world that this Gotham City is contained in. He's giving it a message. I'm not going to let it go down the sewer.
Right.
I'm gonna work my way up the ladder. I'm gonna scare the criminal element to death,
mm-hmm.
so that it has something to be afraid of.
Right.
And I like that approach. I like the Avenging Angel.
Mm-hmm. And that's really the core of Batman, the character. He uses
It's uncomplicated though.
Right, because his whole theme was that criminals are a superstitious lot, and that they are easily intimidated. So if you just scare them, they'll start to go away. And largely, he is successful in street level crime, and then the supervillains come. The problem that I always have had with uh, this and basically the on-screen Batman from this on is the guns on his vehicles.
The weaponry.
The fact that he uses real bullets. Now, in Dark Knight Returns, he has guns on the Batmobile, but he shoots rubber bullets.
Yeah.
The fact that he actually shoots at the Joker, he targets him, he's using missiles, but he doesn't hit him for no reason. I don't like it, because Batman specifically doesn't use guns, because that's what killed his parents.
Yeah.
That is his absolute... He doesn't use them. He doesn't put them on. He has exploding batarangs that don't deliver a lethal charge. He does all this stuff specifically to avoid using guns and killing, but because it looks cool, he's got guns on the Batmobile that shoots open a garage door. He's got guns and missiles, machine guns and missiles on his Batwing, which inevitably crashes every time.
Yeah.
I don't know if you ever watched the animated, both the Batman the Animated series and the Justice League that Kevin Conroy voiced Batman. Every time he was in a Batwing, it crashed. Every time in the animated series, every time. Could not keep that thing in the air.
You never saw him get his pilot's license.
That's true.
You never saw Bruce get a pilot's license. You assume that he has one, but you never see him get it.
Every time he flies the Batwing, it crashes.
I don't know what the is it not the FCC, but the
FAA
regulations. Yeah, the FAA. I don't know what they think about the Batwing. I don't know if they've ever dealt with that, but
well, hey, remember on the TV show, he had his own private hangars, and he would just call the airport and say, "Get the Batcopter ready, get the Batplane ready," and they would have it gassed up and ready for him by the time they got out to the airstrip. So,
well, let's talk a little bit about Nicholson, because Nicholson, to be honest with you, the Joker is just like Batman in that he goes through various incarnations based on who's playing him.
Yeah.
And the biggest thing with Nicholson is that the character goes from being a bouncy clown to being more wisecracking, and that's because of Jack Nicholson.
Mm-hmm.
And now, a little bit of background. They paid him $6 million for this role. Now, Jack Nicholson's asking price at the time was $10 million. With a percentage, I believe, of the gross of the merchandising. And this man came away from this role with about $50 million.
Yeah, I was going to say, he cleaned up on this one.
But he gives a $50 million performance.
Yes, he does.
Because he really, and I love Michael Keaton, I love Batman, but let's face it, Nicholson is the movie. If you don't have Nicholson in the movie, it loses a lot.
Yeah, and did you ever notice when you were watching it, especially now that it's been on repeat in your bookstore for 2 weeks, how similarly and how fun it was to have Jack Nicholson and Jack Palance together in the same scenes, basically mocking each other.
Yeah.
In their countenance and their tones, and bouncing back and forth off of each other with Palance doing his best Nicholson and Nicholson doing his best Palance. It's and I have a special affinity for Jack Palance because he actually lived in a town about 20 minutes away from where I grew up. He retired to a little town called Hazleton, Pennsylvania, which is where I would go to a multiplex. I went to the movies in his town. So, and he was like a local legend. When I saw, and here's another thing, we have a big fair in a neighboring town as well. It's the biggest fair in the state of Pennsylvania, in Bloomsburg, and Mickey Rooney came and played the fair, and it was his birthday, and Jack Palance came out because they were friends, and they brought a birthday cake out for Mickey Rooney because it was his birthday when he was playing. So I got to see Mickey Rooney and Jack Palance on stage together, and Palance,
nice.
When they were both alive in their 80s maybe, in their 80s, Palance did the one-arm push-up. You know, it was so...
he did the one-arm push-up. If millennials, if you don't know, Jack Palance won the Oscar in 1992 for
City Slickers.
For City Slickers, and when he got up on stage, he didn't bother to thank anybody. He got confused, and he just sort of started blabbering on about nothing. And he said, they don't hire me because they think I'm too old. And then he says, they forget that you can do all of these things. And he gets on the floor of the stage and starts doing one-arm push-ups.
Yeah.
And that's
and he was in his 70s.
It's one of the greatest Oscar moments.
Yeah.
He was in his 70s. And even, some of the younger actors were like, I can't even do that.
Yeah.
But that to me, that's one thing that always sticks in my mind when I think of Jack Palance. But this really, Jack Palance was, like you say, he was in his 70s. And he was getting older. And I think this movie really started a renaissance of his career, which really culminated with City Slickers.
Yeah.
The only thing I hate about this movie with Jack Palance is that he's not in it very much.
He's not.
He's got 2 scenes, 3 scenes.
2 or 3, yeah.
He's not in it very much.
No.
Yeah, and by the way, he hated working with Tim Burton.
I bet.
Because he didn't like his directing style.
I'm sure.
But yeah, I'm standing there watching this movie at work the other day, and that scene is on, and I kind of walk by the movie, and I kind of get mesmerized, and I'll stop while I'm on my way somewhere. And my assistant manager gets in the radio and goes, "Hey, sugar bumps, get back to work."
Jack, I need you. You
are my number one
are my number one guy. Now don't forget your lucky deck.
You know who I love in this movie? You know who I really, really love in this movie? I love Bob.
Yeah.
I just love Bob, played by Tracy Walter, who's a wonderful actor. He's in all the Jonathan Demme pictures. He was in Silence of the Lambs. But he was such a loyal goon. He was just such a loyal functionary. And it just, Joker just shoots him. Just, Bob, gun. You know? He just shoots him. I was like, this is your best lackey. I mean,
And then he just hands the gun off to the next guy.
He might have... Gonna need a moment alone here, boys. He might have lived if he hadn't shot Bob. But, but Nicholson just... He does all this great stuff. I remember Siskel and Ebert's review of this. Roger Ebert complained that basically Nicholson does the same thing over and over again. My defense is that's okay.
Yeah.
Because what he does over and over again is great. It's just one thing after the, and every time you see him, he's just doing something funny. And it's like, it's also played for laughs, but keeping to the character because it's sick.
It's sick.
The character is just...
What kind of a world do we live in where a man dressed as a giant bat steals all of my press? This town needs an enema.
Yeah. See, he just, the that scene in the museum.
Oh,
I could watch that scene over and over again. The scene where he sends her a package. And by the way, we're going to talk about Vicky Vale here in a second, but Vicky Vale's got to be the stupidest character I've ever seen in my life in this movie. I mean, who opens a box sent to you from the Joker? First of all?
Look, I mean, it's at least in the museum she didn't know it was from him.
Yeah, in her apartment.
Later in the apartment, she knows it's from him. She opens it up. It's not and then there's the dead hand with the dead flowers. It's like, why did you open that?
Why would you open a box from the Joker? Just after her boyfriend has been shot and then disappears. And the first thing she thinks to do is go open a box that came from the Joker. But anyway, the scene in the museum when he and his goons show up, I will never, ever, for the rest of my life, walk into a museum and not think, gentlemen, let's broaden our minds. Lawrence? And then that song starts playing. And it's great because you see and you sense that Tim Burton and his creative team knew how to use Jack Nicholson.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how much of this was ad-libbed. I don't know if Jack Nicholson ad-libs at all.
I don't think he does.
I know he's I know he's very much a professional.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know how much of that was ad-libbed. I don't know how much of that was written for him. But he does just this great stuff. And that scene where he finally sits down with Kim Basinger, and he does that whole thing, and she says, "And what do you want?" My face on the $1 bill. I am the world's first fully functioning homicidal artist. I do what others only dream of. I make art until someone dies. I don't know if that was in the script or not, but if it wasn't, he's a better actor than I think he is. And it's also keeping to the character.
Oh yeah.
Now this character is like I say, he's more a Bugs Bunny type than what Cesar Romero would have done. He's more wisecracking, always with the jokes, but always with a sick joke.
Mm-hmm.
And he's the scene. He walks up to her and she's got the flower and he squirts the flower and the acid just puffs on the wall.
Mm-hmm.
All of that just these sick jokes that he does. And that the sickest though for me is when he shakes hands with the mob boss.
I'm glad you're dead.
That is a horrifying scene.
Yeah. I'm glad you're dead. I'm glad you're dead.
Yeah. Oh, you should also know this. That scene where he is talking to that charred corpse, that was the first scene I ever saw from this movie.
Really?
And it was on, I believe it was on maybe 60 Minutes.
Mm.
And I saw that scene and I'm thinking, this is not going to be Adam West.
Mm-mm.
This will not be Super Friends. This is going to be something really, really dark. And that's what really got me hooked into it. Because I thought, this is going to be something really different.
They finally did the Joker the way that the Joker was supposed to be.
Right.
And actually, the Joker wasn't even supposed to be as big as he was. When Jerry Roberts actually created him, or Jerry Robbins, I can't remember what created him.
It wasn't Jerry Roberts.
I think it was also the same name. But he was supposed to be. He was killed off in the first issue.
Yes.
He was in, and they got so many letters that they brought him back. Bob Kane and Jerry Robbins didn't want to. He wasn't supposed to be anything, and they just kept bringing him back, and he became a fan favorite. So, and in the early ones, he was as murderous as he ended up being later. It was the goofiness that just, of the 60s, and just anybody who was a criminal was just going out to steal stuff. They weren't doing anything but stealing stuff in the original Batman TV show. That was it.
Yeah.
They would just steal stuff. And it was like, there are other elements to crime, guys, than just just stealing something. I tried to do a marathon of the Batman TV show because I have the Blu-ray box set of the whole 3 seasons.
All 3 seasons?
I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. I had to break it up because it's just the same episode over and over.
Just watch the movie and it's fine. Just watch the movie. That's really all you need.
I mean, at least that had a story that wasn't them stealing something. They were trying to take over the UN. But I mean, so the Joker finally became the murderous psychopath that he was supposed to be, and it was great. He was dark, but he was funny, and he thinks that the darkest things are the best jokes, and Nicholson really did do a great job. When you accuse him of being over the top, it's because this character is always over the top.
This character's over the top. Yeah.
But I don't think Nicholson ever came back down from the Joker. Because everything after this was straight over the top.
Well, let's talk a little bit about his career, because you have to know that Jack Nicholson came out of the new Hollywood.
Right. Very much.
When the studio system broke down in the 60s, the late 60s, and more violent content, more sexual content, profanity, things that were not allowed by the production code before that, were finally making their way into American movies. And along with that were actors like Jack Nicholson. And he came along, and he was something new. He was this wild and crazy guy. Coming out of Roger Corman's stock. Right. And he worked, he paid his dues.
Yes.
He paid his dues. He made, Roger Corman,
Little Shop of Horrors.
You might want to know, he showed up on the Andy Griffith Show. But the big break, the thing that really kind of shook the world, was Easy Rider.
Easy Rider.
Where he played this lawyer who was a drunk, and he hooks up with these 2 guys riding motorcycles to a drug deal. They have a drug deal, and they're driving cross country on their motorcycles. And he plays their buddy that they pick up. And from there was something wild about him. There was something in his smile. There was something in his voice. He had this very laconic voice, and he had this temper about him that was perfectly suited for the times.
Yeah. And also,
sometimes he externalized like Easy Rider. Sometimes he internalized like Five Easy Pieces. And then he won an Oscar for Cuckoo's Nest.
Yeah.
But I think the crazy guy Jack really started with The Shining.
Yeah.
And that was in 1980. That really was what brought that reputation.
Because he was pretty much he was the loon in that, and then he was a loon in The Witches of Eastwick, and then he was a loon in, he was kind of crazy in terms of Endearment and all sorts of different stuff. And it's also worth noting he actually was a writer too. He has a few scripts to his name, specifically the Monkees movie Head, which he co-wrote with Bob Rafelson, and his
that movie is a head scratcher.
It is.
Wow!
It is
if you
really,
love the Monkees, don't watch Head. It's an acid trip.
Rafelson wanted to do something very much different from the television show that he was also a director on. when they made that movie, and it is weird. It is weird.
Yeah.
And the last thing that he's
bizarre.
credited as writing is Drive, he said, which was his directorial debut.
Yeah. Well, he directed. He actually directed the Chinatown sequel.
He directed Chinatown sequel. He also directed Going South. But the last thing that he wrote was Drive, he said, in 1971, which was his directorial debut. Yeah. He's only directed 4 movies, but
Jack Nicholson is a legend in his own time.
Yes.
And he's retired now, but he was a legend in his own time. And that personality, that bold, beautiful, crazy man personality is why he's one of the most original actors you've ever seen.
Yeah.
And I always say of this, and this is the supreme compliment that I can give Jack Nicholson, he is the only actor I can think of in my lifetime that we will still be talking about in 300 years. Just a brilliant actor. He could do anything.
Yeah.
And he could play over the top. He could underplay it. He's just a marvelous actor.
Oh yeah, I mean,
and he was very good. He's very good in character roles.
Mm-hmm.
He's very good in as a leading man.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and he was always. And it was. This is the thing that George C. Scott always talked about: the joy of performance.
Mm-hmm.
Jack Nicholson has the joy of performance.
Yes, he does.
That's what makes him so appealing.
Mm-hmm. He's magnetic to watch, and
he is.
In just about anything he's in, you don't begrudge him. You're happy to see him, whether the movie is any good or not. Like The Witches of Eastwick.
Bucket list.
Oh, yeah.
He's the only thing I liked about A Few Good Men. And I know I won't make any friends by saying that, but he's the only thing I liked about A Few Good Men.
You know what? A Few Good Men has its moments.
It has its moments.
And they're mostly Jack Nicholson.
But as far as this movie goes, getting back to this one, let's talk about a couple of the things that really do work in this movie. That really, really work, just besides Nicholson. And I was struck seeing it again by the look of the film.
Oh, yeah.
Because
it looks
it's
incredible.
This city, Gotham City, is really, and by the way, the production design was the only thing nominated for an Oscar, and it was the only, and of course it won.
Mm-hmm.
And it reminds me a lot of Metropolis. It borrows a lot from German Expressionism.
Yeah, it does.
Where a lot of the city seems to be made up mostly of gasworks.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very oppressive.
It's very
kind
steamy.
of atmosphere.
Very, very steamy.
Very steamy. Where crime and the streets are very narrow. Did you notice how narrow the alleyways and the streets? It almost seems like a small town.
Yeah, and it's
but an
funny.
Industrial town.
He also borrows a lot from film noir. Especially with the shadow, the use of heavy shadow, and the dirt on the streets, the newspapers blowing, and it's the atmosphere is really, really good.
And he does a good job. Burton does a good job of populating the film so that you feel like there is this city is drowning in its criminal elements.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
One thing at the very beginning of the movie that you'll notice, if you watch the movie again, you'll notice when the man and the woman and the kid, which, by the way, that was a strange little double back, because when you're watching the movie for the first time, you think it's Bruce Wayne,
right?
His parents,
Yeah.
It turns out to be somebody else. But the one thing that I noticed is that when they're walking through and they're trying to get a cab, because they've just left the theater and they're trying to get a cab, and they're trying to get home, they walk by all of this gray.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone is dressed in browns and grays and kind of almost drab colors, especially as they start to get into the bad part of town, where all the drug addicts and all of the prostitutes are sitting around.
Truth be told, all of Gotham is the bad part of town, but...
Yeah, Yeah, but they walk through this arena, this almost area where the criminal element seems to have gathered. And they walk by a prostitute, which, as bad as this town is, if you think about it and you watch that scene, the prostitute focuses on the kid. If you notice, I mean, now that's pretty bad.
Yeah.
But the funny thing is, she's wearing a red shawl. Okay, she's wearing red. In the midst of all this gray. And it's almost like the criminal element and all of the bad stuff is going on. It's as noticeable as this woman dressed in this, and nobody does anything about it.
Yep.
You know, nobody's, the cops, nobody's doing anything about it. But it's right there in front of you, on every corner, on every street, down every alleyway. There's crime, and nobody does anything about it. Even the well-meaning police chief can't contain this criminal scourge that's going on. That's why you need that. But I thought it was interesting that color just pops out like that. And but the fact that she propositions the kid was really kind of interesting to me.
You can't ignore that when she propositions a 9-year-old. In front of his parents.
In front of his parents, yeah.
The other thing that needs to be brought up, the production design is incredible, but this film also houses Danny Elfman's greatest score.
Oh my God. This has become the official, or unofficial, I don't know how you look at it, the official Batman theme music.
Right. I mean,
when you think of Batman, you think of this.
Right. And I think largely it's due to its inclusion as the opening credits in the Batman the Animated Series, which they actually slowed down for the animated series. If you listen to the opening theme in the movie,
it's a lot slower.
Something feels wrong because it's a lot faster than it is on the animated series. It's a lot faster tempo, and they slowed it down for the animated series, which I think is better, personally. But the whole score, though, is really, really good and atmospheric, and it's not Danny Elfman goofy, which is why it's really, really good. And there's only been a few times where I've been able to sit and be like, oh, that was Danny Elfman? Oh. Yeah. Because I usually don't like Danny Elfman's music. Because it's too...
Here's the funny thing, is that this score, you can remember this score.
Oh, yeah.
You can't remember the score to Dark Knight. As much as I love Dark Knight, you can't remember that score.
Well, that's because Hans Zimmer is a crap composer. I hate Hans Zimmer.
He's all about mood. He's all about mood. Danny Elfman's more about overtures.
The only time you remember a Hans Zimmer score is when he farms out a theme to somebody else.
This is true.
The Wonder Woman theme that Junkie XL did for Batman v Superman is the only part of that score I remember. Because it was awesome.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But this score, I mean, this has become one of the most recognizable pieces of music in popular culture.
Oh, yeah.
And it's...
it was the beats and the movements and the tone that he struck with it is unlike anything he ever did, and it's probably the best comic score since John Williams' Superman score in '78.
Yeah. Well, he also kind of surprised everybody because he came from Oingo Boingo. Yeah. And everybody, was this kind of sort of new wave band, and it was kind of it was stylized, and the music is still great, by the way. But then he just became this composer, and around the same time he also started doing the music for The Simpsons, and it was a new style. It wasn't all atmosphere; it was overtures, right? But it was something new, and that's why I think this theme stuck. I think that's why this this musical score really stuck,
Mm-hmm.
and why it has lasted for 25 years.
Yeah, and
Um,
but it was so different than what he normally did. Um, the way I always kind of felt about Danny Elfman was kind of it expressed best in the Family Guy Star Wars spoof Blue Harvest, when at one point Chris as Luke turns John Williams and the London Symphony Orchestra, everybody, and he plays something, and he goes, now can you play this? And he goes, no, but we can play the People's Court theme, and then he plays the People's Court theme. And then he comes back to his aunt and uncle who've been burned out, and he's like, oh no, John Williams! Great. Now we have to finish this thing with Danny Elfman. And he does this upbeat bum 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 bum, and he just takes out his lightsaber and cuts off his head.
he essentially does Pee-wee's score.
Yeah.
You know.
And he just cuts off his head with a lightsaber. I'm like, yeah, that's kind of how I feel too.
Let's talk about the impact of this movie, because people forget now that this was the second highest grossing movie of 1989, behind Last Crusade.
Yeah.
This thing made buckets of money.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was the most anticipated movie of the year. It was one of the most popular movies of the year.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, everybody in the country went to see it.
Yeah.
I think even my grandmother went to see it. And there was merchandising. There was merchandising, everything had that little symbol on it for months. And that was before the movie came out.
Mm-hmm.
You couldn't take 3 steps through a shopping mall without seeing something with Batman on it.
Right.
So this thing was being hyped up and promoted, for months before it came out.
Mm-hmm.
And when it came out, everybody in the country went to see it.
It was
and
huge.
They loved it, and they went back to see it. It was huge. It was one of the only movies that summer that wasn't a sequel.
Mm-hmm.
But when it came out, there was a resurgence in Batman, a resurgence in his popularity, because it turned people's minds off of the campy 60s TV series.
Right.
And it had an impact that few other films ever had. Now, the one thing I've always been curious about is that knowing how Hollywood is, knowing their trends, knowing how they get hooked on a trend and they will beat it to death. Because you have to remember, at the time, this was the late 80s, the big trend was turning old TV shows into movies. Which some people blame this movie.
It's a good thing. It's a good thing that they didn't keep that up. You know.
Yeah.
With current trends.
But knowing how they pick up on trends, I was shocked that they didn't mine other properties.
Yeah.
Mine other comic book properties. The only one I can think of at this time period was The Flash. And it was on television briefly.
It was on CBS for a season.
Yeah, but maybe because of the failure of some of the last 3 Superman movies, the Superman 3, 4, and the Supergirl movie, maybe they were a little bit gun shy about running too hard and fast with it. But I was just shocked that they didn't pick up the ball and run with it.
Yeah, and then the next after the 4 Batman movies kind of ran their course, and they scrapped the 5th one, which was going to be called Batman Triumphant.
With Harley Quinn. With Madonna as Harley Quinn.
So after they scrapped that, because Batman and Robin did so poorly, the next big superhero movie was X-Men.
I don't know. I think
2000.
the appetizer for X-Men... X-Men was big, but I think the appetizer for X-Men was Blade.
In 98?
I credit Blade with starting the Renaissance. It was popular. It wasn't a success.
That was a year after Batman and Robin, right?
That was a year before. That was 98. But
Batman and Robin was 97.
It was a popular movie.
I think.
97. I'm sorry. Yeah, 97, and then Blade was 98.
Yeah.
And then X-Men was 2000. Okay.
Yeah.
I was getting my. I forget stuff about Batman and Robin. I try to forget stuff about Batman and Robin. But the funny thing is, it's all. It was just strange to me that they didn't grab the ball and run with it after Batman basically took over the world.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
it,
I think that they kind of understood the limitations of where their technology was, and they didn't. They could do Batman because Batman was a man in a cape. He didn't fly. They could do practical stuff like the grapnel gun and stuff like that without having to animate and matte paint and try to do green screen and all the weird stuff that they ended up having to do with Christopher Reeve in the Superman movies. And you know, with the Flash or with even with X-Men, which they were trying to get an X-Men movie off the ground even as early as 1990, 1991, 92. And the Roger Corman Fantastic Four movie that died a slow and painful death, that was completed with a music track and everything, and never saw the light of day because of copyright problems.
It was a tax shelter.
Yeah.
That whole movie was never meant to be released. It was a tax shelter.
Right. So, and you know, they were trying to cast X-Men, and they were trying to work out how to do Spider-Man, which they didn't end up doing until 2002. And you know, they finally with I guess I would say maybe Blade, but Blade wasn't as big and popular as X-Men ended up being.
It was an unexpected thing. People didn't expect it. You know, most people had not heard of Blade.
Right, that's true.
And they went to see the movie and they thought, hey, this is pretty good. You know, it's based on a Marvel comic, yeah. And then it made some money. And then I think, and I don't know this, I have to do a little research, I think it gave the studio some confidence to say, hey, you know, let's try something else.
Because it
was... If they like this...
Because it was rated R. It wasn't the first rated R comic book movie. I believe that the 1987 Dolph Lundgren Punisher has the pleasure of being the Did you ever see that one?
Okay, Blade was the first good R-rated comic book movie.
That's true.
That Punisher had so many problems.
It was bad.
It was just
awful.
It was
so bad.
They had to do Punisher at least 4 times before they got it right.
Well, and now with the Marvel Cinematic Universe television side, Netflix side, him showing up in Daredevil season 2, they got the character right. I've never liked the Punisher to begin with.
I haven't either.
I don't like the character. He's a psychopath. I don't like... The only hero that I've ever liked that killed people was Wolverine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, that was it. And I knew why he was killing people.
Coming back to Batman, we're going to wrap up here a little bit. Watching it the last 2 weeks, it has dated.
A little bit.
A lot of the action scenes are a little stiff.
A little?
That bat plane.
Michael Keaton couldn't move in that thing.
That whole...
that was an 80-pound rubber suit.
Yeah, and he couldn't move in it. How in the world he could ever fight in it, I don't know. But there are things in the movie that I think are kind of lame. That scene where he goes up in the clouds and he's in front of the moon. The bat plane's in front of the moon. I thought that was...
I always thought it looked cool, but I never understood why he did it, because the cloud cover was so thick, nobody would have been able to see him.
Yeah. Yeah. The whole... let me tell you. The car chase in this movie is clumsy as it can be. I mean, it's just...
because the Batmobile is clunky. It can't turn. It's too big.
There's no turn radius.
It's too long.
He has to have a grappling hook to turn.
Right. It's not a practical machine. It looks cool, but I mean, the Batmobile in the comics and later the Tumbler in the Nolan trilogy, it was actually
I like the
a
Tumbler.
good functional car and could do stuff. And in the comics, it was always a good. It wasn't like long out in the front and everything. Like that whole thing. Like I can't even begin to understand the physics of the engine or how that car ran. Like where was the engine? Was it sprawled out over that whole long front cab, or I've it looks cool, but it is not a functional machine.
Well, and not only that, but also just a lot of it. They do a lot of practical effects, which I love practical effects, by the way.
Mm.
It's just a lot of it. A lot of the fight scenes are clumsy.
Very.
And any time they try to use technology in this movie, anytime they try to use any of Batman's wonderful toys, it does feel a little clumsy. But nothing in this movie feels as clumsy as Kim Basinger. I don't think she knew what to do in this movie. She doesn't have anything to work with.
No.
Unless she has a moment when she's actually allowed to be a journalist. She is not allowed to be functional to this movie. She's just kind of there with her mouth gaping open.
See,
and anytime the guys are in the room, she doesn't know what to do.
Vicky Vale was not a good character in the comics either. She was always just kind of there. She was Bruce's fiance for a while. She was just there. I mean, you say she was clueless, and then she opened up that box. She was clueless in the comics too. She had no idea that Bruce Wayne was Batman. He never told her, and she was a reporter. Like she could never figure it out.
She's been to war-torn countries, yet she withers. It just at the slightest moment of aggression.
Yeah,
it's like.
There's no consistency of character at all.
No, there's no consistency of character unless she's in the office or she's in the field.
Mm-hmm.
Then she's actually a professional. But she can't be a professional when Bruce Wayne is around, or when Batman's around, or when Joker's around. She just sort of becomes just standing there gawping. When
the stuff is coming down, she turns into a damsel in distress, and she should have been a lot stronger of a character.
Yeah. But one thing that people don't really give enough credit for my taste in this movie, is Robert Wall.
Mm.
I love Knox, and I missed Knox in the second one. I really did. Knox is just such a fun character. He's just a mouthpiece in it. I love Robert Wall anyway.
Yeah, me too.
He's there to be the wisecracking guy, and I love this character.
His stand-up was always great too. When he still did stand-up back in the 80s and early 90s, his stand-up was fantastic.
Yeah. He's having fun in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
He's having fun, the fun that I hope that Kim Basinger would have. But I'm going to tell you, and this is going to be kind of my final thought on this, the lamest scene in this entire movie, comes right at the very end, when they unveil the bat signal.
Oh yeah.
Because Robert Wall steps forward and he says, "Well, how will we get his message?" And he says, "He sent us a signal," and he flips the signal on, and the light comes on. It's this big searchlight, and then they show it against the clouds. It looks like a cartoon, and they show it twice. It just looks terrible. It looks like some kid drew it on the thing. It just, I was like, well, at least they tried in Batman Begins to make some kind of reality out of it.
Right.
At least they tried, but it just looks stupid, and it's purple.
Yeah.
It just,
yeah.
Sorry, it just.
And
that's a clang at the end of the movie.
And I've been watching this movie now for
25 years.
28 years?
Something like that.
89, so yeah, 28 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw it in the theater as a 8-year-old kid, and I shouldn't have seen it as an 8-year-old kid.
Yeah, no business. Anybody under the age of probably 12 would really need to see this movie.
Yeah, I waited until my son was 13 to show it to him. He still hasn't seen the Dark Knight trilogy.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you said that it was one of my favorite movies. It's not really one of my favorite movies. It's something that I go back to. He's my favorite character.
One of your favorite characters.
My favorite character, but I can't actually put any Batman movie as one of my favorite movies because they never quite get them right. Each one gets something better. Well, not each one, but like Batman and Robin got nothing right. But,
nothing right. Well, I'll give Batman and Robin defense for one thing, and that is I think George Clooney played a decent Bruce Wayne.
He did play a great
all
Bruce
I can
Wayne.
say.
But anything else, he played a great public Bruce Wayne. The private Bruce Wayne and Batman, and he probably could play that, but he wasn't given an opportunity to play that properly.
Right.
So, I love Batman, and I give every Batman actor and every Batman movie a shot, and I have yet to be fully fulfilled. I actually think that Ben Affleck has been the closest, but then
I still like Christian Bale, even though I know his Batman sounds like he has a cold.
Well,
you know,
it
sounds like he has a cold.
We'll get to the Dark Knight trilogy at some point in this series, because I do want to talk about them. And it was more like this. He talks like he has a bad cold and it's the laryngitis. He can't get... And if you want something that makes a lot of fun of that, Pete Holmes starred in a Funny or Die series as Batman. And he as a clueless Batman. It's hilarious. There's a number of them. At one point, Patton Oswalt plays the Penguin.
Oh God!
And there was one of them early on when they started doing it that he was trying to get his voice, and it's Pete Holmes going through all these different voices until he finally stumbles upon that one, and this criminal is helping him figure out which voice to use. It's hilarious. This movie is still entertaining. It's still. So well put together visually, that even where the plot goes awry, or where the
technology goes awry,
or the script goes awry, there's always something interesting going on visually, or where one part flags, something else picks up the slack. So like where it might not be visually interesting, the script actually kind of picks up a little bit, or an actor picks up the thing and makes that scene a little bit more interesting. And it's not a great movie. It'll never be a great movie. No. But it's a good movie, and it's entertaining, and Nicholson is fantastic in it, and Keaton is really good. Very surprising in it. Even after you've seen things like Birdman and Spotlight and his more recent stuff, and throughout his career, this is still a surprising turn for him.
This became a role that was very hard for him to follow.
Which is what Birdman plays off of.
Yeah, Birdman, I'd say if you want to see 4 great movies from Michael Keaton, see Birdman, see
Spotlight,
Clean and Sober, Spotlight, and a movie called Game 6.
Oh, yeah.
Those are the films, those 4 films are the ones you need to see. If you really want to see his great dramatic work. And unfortunately, I think Batman will be on his headstone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Depending on what he does with the Vulture. We haven't seen Thor yet, so... Was it Thor?
No, it's Spider-Man.
No, is it
Spider-Man Homecoming.
Spider-Man. Yeah, Spider-Man Homecoming. Yeah, we haven't seen him play Vulture yet, but
no.
Who knows?
But
anyway,
I think that wraps it up here for us on the Pod Bay Doors. I am Doug Heller, again, of TalkMovieToMe.com. You can find me on Twitter at TalkMovieToMe1. And Jerry, where can they find you on the social sphere?
Always, I'm at ArmchairCinema.com, ArmchairOscars.com. I'm on Twitter at ArmchairCMA, and I'm also on my blog at ArmchairCinema at WordPress.
And so that kind of wraps everything up for us. The Pod Bay doors are closed.
The mission has been completed.